Let's discuss an ongoing legal case that could have great implications for the future of science. And I don't think I'm too overdramatic if I claim that this case could have implications not only for science, but also for the public's trust in science. A group of scientific researchers, spearheaded by Dr. Lucina Adin, I hope I didn't butcher that name too much, a neuroscience professor at UCLA, they filed a lawsuit against 6 major publishers in academia. And according to this lawsuit, the publishers violated antitrust laws by conspiring to not pay scholars or the researchers for peer review work and by restricting simultaneous manuscript submissions to multiple journals. So the 6 publishers that are sued in this class action lawsuits are Elsevier, Walter and Kluwer, John Wiley and Sons, Sage Publications, Taylor and Francis, and Springer Nature. So pretty massive companies. Looking at an extract from the lawsuit itself, we see that first, the publisher's defendants agreed to not compensate scholars for their labor, in particular, not to pay for their peer-reviewed services. Second, the publisher defendants agreed not to compete with each other for manuscripts by requiring scholars to submit their manuscripts to only one journal at a time. And third, the publisher defendants agreed to prohibit scholars from freely sharing the scientific advancements described in submitted manuscript, while those manuscripts are under peer reviewed. Okay, so in a way, this is nothing new because as scientists, we are all too familiar with these practices. And if you talk to any type of researcher in academia, he or she will likely tell you that, yeah, well, this system looks like this, it sucks, but it's what we have. So basically, we hang down our heads and kind of, shrug a little bit, and then business goes on as usual. And luckily now this has been taken to a different level. And all these practices, including the publish or perish mentality and no-cost peer reviewing, have gone on for a while, and it started in the beginning of the 20th century, but really got intensified by the mid-20th century when the business model started really picking up with Nature, Springer Nature, and Elsevier. We have taxpayers who primarily are the funders of research, and once the researchers receive these grants or funds, they do what they do best, research, and they conduct their studies to achieve significant results. And then the publish or perish system, ingrained in academia, pressures researchers to publish their findings to advance their cases. And as we see now, they are often forced to submit their results and methods to one publisher at a time. And since the publishing system often restricts academics from proposing the same research to multiple journals, it may potentially delay the publication as publishers don't feel the pressure to expedite this publication process. And then academics are also pressured often through a sense of duty to work for free as a peer reviewer, so they provide the publishers with free labor. If the work is accepted, the publishers then often require the research institutes or lab to sign away all the intellectual property rights without any compensations. And lastly, despite being the creators of the research, the researchers, the academic researchers and their institutes often have to pay to access articles that are placed behind paywalls. So this whole system can hinder the accessibility and dissemination of scientific knowledge, in my view, which is ultimately funded by you and me and the public in general. So let's bring in Sheeva, who is a science communicator. She has loads of experience working with and working in academia. Sheeva, welcome, and let's talk a little bit about this case together.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for having me back on your YouTube channel. I love your YouTube. It's always full of unique insights about this case. I actually hadn't heard about it until you wrote me about it and sent me this article. Maybe you can share the article with the viewers. But basically, what you said, that there's like a bunch of different publishing companies that are working together to um, basically, they have had record profits. In the article, it says they made billions of dollars at a detriment to the scientists. So I've had a lot of personal experience with the publishing system. And I guess before I get into the details of my perspective on this, I just wanted to say that I fully support open access publishing, and it's a huge barrier for um, scientists, especially people that are independent scientists like me, to try to get the $25 to get an article. I have to go to my local university to get articles, and my university doesn't have all of them. And I'm also part of like 2 alumni networks, and they don't always have the articles. I don't even know how to get the articles from MIT. Maybe that's on me. So then I go to my local university and I just I'm sitting around these students. I don't know them. Not that that's bad. I love going to our university library, but it's such a massive hassle for me to get these articles. Not that I'm complaining that publishers exist. I think it's very important that publishers are able to thrive, but in particular, academic article publishing, like scientific articles, unless you are affiliated with the university and have access, and I would say a university like MIT or Harvard, where you have access to like all of the different articles, not just like some of them, then you have to constantly email around, ask for people's articles. Articles that are published by publishers are embargoed for a while, so the actual author can't even share them. I am an independent neuroscience researcher, and I just published 2 articles, one in an open source journal, and the other one in another journal called Alcoholism Clinical and Experimental Reviews. Nothing against alcoholism clinical and experimental reviews. I've been published there before when I was a scientist, but it's a long story as to why I'm publishing outside of academia. Basically, when I left graduate school, I had done 2 projects, one on alcoholism and one on PTSD. And so in the pandemic, I was like, well, I miss science. Everyone's talking about science every day. So I guess I'll reach out to some people I know and see if they want to co-write a review with me. So I finally get my research out. So that's what I did. And luckily for this alcoholism paper, I connected with someone that I met at the Society for Neuroscience conference probably 10 years ago. And she's a member of the Research Society on Alcoholism. So I guess that gives her special privileges to publish in ACER, but it's still $60 per page after it's published. And even submitting, I think sometimes you charge a fee, because my other paper I'm going to try to publish myself as first author. I'm not first author on this other article because my colleague is collaborator, and I guess she's paying the $60 per page. I don't know where she's getting that money. We didn't use any grant money to write our paper. Perhaps this is a rare, but I actually, like, for my other paper that I'm writing, I don't even know if I have money to submit it anywhere to like a real journal, the ones that are big name journals, because the costs are so high just to submit, and then per page, I don't have money to publish. I don't have money to pay as an independent researcher that doesn't get paid. And it kind of shuts out sort of independent researchers, and I think it's a very huge barrier to science. Another thing I wanted to say that I learned from attending the AAAS conference this past year is that federally funded research increasingly is being mandated to be open access. NASA has a policy like this. NIH has a policy like this here in the US. Federally funded research is funded by taxpayers, but then the taxpayers can't read the research because it's all paywalled. So that doesn't make sense. So I think scientists have been pushing back on these practices forever. There's so much time and energy and effort that goes into preparing a grant and publishing that research, and to just waste our taxpayer dollars by just having the discussion end there after that, the analysis of their data. we can't even read the results. I'm surprised that lawmakers aren't more angry about this, and maybe scientists are definitely. I can say I don't know any scientists that really like the publishing system the way it is for academic journal articles.
Well, from my own experience in academia, is that you have two camps, especially the old schoolers, the professors, can be a bit hesitant to publish their work in open science journals for some reason or another. But most of the people I've talked to in academia, they don't see the true benefits in the long run with having this type of restricted accessibility to science. Because if we think about it, it's like you said as well, this is taxpayers' money that go into science, and then basically either you give away this research for free to publishers who then get profit from it. Sometimes you even have to pay them to publish your work. For me, it's completely bizarre that you're paying for your research and then you have to pay for them to publish your research. And this is something that has puzzled me. In my channels, we talk a lot about scientific thinking. And I think this is something that you're also interested in your channel, although maybe a little bit more indirectly, but still, this is something that you push for as well, to start thinking a little bit more critically in your science communication or in your communication in general. And this is something that I got from my years in academia. It was to try to think like a scientist. So being critical of the information that you receive. And I think that scientists and researchers are extremely good at that. We go to research clubs, journal clubs, and then we're able to, digest the information that we receive and kind of dissect it and be critical of it in the most constructive way. Yet when it comes to this type of systems that control the science or control the scientific narratives, we're a little bit more hesitant to, in general, oppose to this type of system, even when we see the long-term harms in this. Like in this case, a publishing system that benefits the profit-driven businesses. So my question is, if that has to do with the fact that we are basically opposing or critiquing, in this case, the hand that feeds us, or alternatively, if you think that scientists in general, by being in contact with them, if you see that their minds are changing, they are becoming much more critical of this.
Well, it's kind of complicated because I do think that on some level we are, in a way, biting the hand that feeds us in a way. But maybe we're not biting the hand that feeds us by complaining that it's too expensive to publish. But we are, but I run the Fancy Comma blog and it's not a journal, but it takes a lot of time to submissions, edit stuff, choose what to publish that, adheres to our editorial principles, running peer review and everything. That takes a lot of time. And currently peer review isn't even paid for. You're not compensated for being a reviewer. So then it's like, how are these journals making record profits while they basically exploit academics for their expertise? And I don't really think that's right. And I think many people in science do not think it's right that publishers are doing this. But that said, if publishers just went away entirely, like if science we dismantled Science magazine, that would be, in a way, I want to say it would be catastrophic for science as an enterprise, but maybe it wouldn't. But is that a risk we're willing to take? Like, that's why it's kind of hard, because science, the whole point of science is to do research and publish it in these journals. And then the journals obviously have to be profitable if we want them to exist. So then it's like, how can we make journals profitable while also compensating the reviewers for their time and not making it so expensive that if you want to be in publishing and in academic, if in science, you have to be affiliated with an academic institution. Like, even if you want to read an article, I find that to be a barrier for science in general. So, like, in a way, I guess we are biting the hand that feeds us, but in another way, if we could change that metaphor to make it more accurate, maybe we're just like, the food's too hot or something. We're just like, cool down the food before you feed us.
I see a lot of shifts towards this preprint journals or articles as well, the bioarchives, the med archives, which provide a lot of benefit to the public and opens up the research that is ongoing. And somehow that works. You know, all this open access and open source type of work, it seems to work because people have a tendency to want to bring optimism and good work to the public. And in my opinion, and that's you might not share with me, but in my opinion, these profitable companies are an obstacle in this process of making science open and understandable to the public. As soon as you start involving money into this, then you start creating barriers to people's engagement and possibilities to appear in this workspace, and it becomes much more money oriented than oriented towards the public interests. And that's my problem with this. And I think there must be alternatives where we can work for a more open science, engaging and opening the discussion for most people. But what is your thought? Have you been finding much information about this lawsuit and the criticism against publishers?
Well, so the criticism, I have heard the criticism from a lot of places. There's constantly journalists that are covering science and they can't even access the articles. So they ask people, they're like, I constantly get requests for like, hey, do you have this article? I actually have a ResearchGate profile where I post all the academic work that I've done. And I also have PDFs to my articles on my website as well at sheevaazma.com myself. But actually, that's not possible because of embargoes that make it difficult for you. Like, I think the embargo on my recently accepted ACER article is like a year or something. So for a year, I can't publicly share a PDF of my article or something. Publish or perish is like the phrase of academia, and it involves publishing. Like if you don't publish, that's the end of your career as a scientist. But I think it's really important that we're talking about these problems with publishing because that's not even the only problem there is with publishing. There's a number of problems that impede scientific progress. Like, for example, this idea that people that are trainees, graduate students that are successful have to publish in a high impact journal. That means that first they're to publish in a high impact journal, you have to collect a lot of data. And then that makes your PhD longer. So then you have to basically work more. And maybe that's not even possible for some people. And maybe it's not even possible to get, like, every single graduate student cannot have a Nature paper. Every single person in science cannot have a first author or any author science paper. So maybe that's not realistic for science.
This type of mentality, the publish or perish, I see it, and I see that the researchers, they carry it as a badge of honor. And in the end, there must be a better way. So where we can share the knowledge from within the academic research, so it doesn't become an exclusive environment where only people with great knowledge can share the data and understand what's going on. But at the same time, getting rid of this profit incentivizing practices that just lead to so much more delays and harms than it should.
Well, I would add one thing. The publish or perish, this mentality, it's beyond publishing. It kind of relates to publishing is a huge part of the problem. And publishers, I think, knowing that they can profit off of this, are profiting off of this. On a more local level, publishing is news publishing is definitely, many people say it's a dying industry. I personally know several journalistic publications that have closed just this year, and a few journalism organizations are being bought up by companies and that try to profit off of them. So that's one problem. For a lot of people, publish or perish can end their careers. Like when I was in graduate school and I submitted my paper to the Journal of Traumatic Stress and it didn't get accepted, that was it. That publishing is the way that we are legitimized in science. And so we have to make sure that the systems we create to evaluate science are in fact truly legitimate as well, that they actually reflect like scientific advances in scientific thinking rather than setting bars that are too high for ourselves to achieve. And in a way that people can profit off of us as scientists. Like I find that sad that publishers can make so much money and yet I can barely read an article I really want to read because all the really good neuro psych publications are incredibly paywalled. So that's my personal gripe. But yeah.
If you work at an institute with no money, you barely have any access to the high impact articles. I think most researchers would acknowledge that this is a real problem. But seeing that it is a problem, if we now assume that it is a problem, how can we as communicators help the process towards a better procedure in the publication and research fields?
Yeah, so that's a great question, not just for science communicators, but also scientists in general. And
Yeah,
I think that it really comes back to this idea of reflecting on the way we do science, and that is actually its own discipline. And it's called Science of Science. And it's a very small discipline that I learned about attending the AAAS conference. We have to start asking ourselves these questions. And the reason we don't talk about them is because we're not trained as scientists to think about this. We're just like, oh, I'm going to the lab. I'm gonna, against all odds, I'm gonna get this out, even if it kills me, like that kind of mentality. And I don't think that's healthy for scientists. And when you have a thing like that, where like your only measurement is whether you wrote that paper or not. Like there's a lot of other stuff that's important in science, like outreach, talking to people about science, learning how to communicate science. Um, Now I guess you can tweet about research you're doing or do a preprint or something. Um, I think we have to move away from publish or perish, and we have to move to a more collaborative form of science where people aren't given the option to publish in a broken system or just not be a scientist at all. I think that's really terrible. And I think it's bad for science and it's bad for the individual people that are forced to work in this system. So that's what I would say. I think that would be an amazing start for science as an enterprise.
yeah, I think you have a point there. It's not strange to see somebody working 12 hours a day on their science project or their research project. That's completely normal, and it's expected from you that you don't take holidays, you don't take any days off, you just work weekends and weekdays. And somehow we ended up in some type of loop or spiral or whatever you want to call it, where that's the only thing we think about. And that's where the mentality comes. We go to work, we live the publish or perish type of lifestyle, and then we don't have energy to be thinking about what's wrong with this system. And this is something that's why I also want to bring up this type of questions, because for me it's not enough to just say, well, it is what it is, and then we go on living the lives that we done. I want to kind of pinpoint where it is that we can improve. And in this case, I think there is a massive flaw in the publishing industry and the publishing business and the scientific procedures to reach publications. And I'm trying to highlight these problems by looking at, conflicts of interests or lack of transparency, lack of integrity in science.
So let me stop you and ask you a question. So, what if we, hypothetically speaking, what if we figured out a way to move the publishers from profit driven models and just turn them all into nonprofits? What do you think about that? Like, do you think that's possible? Have you heard of any examples of nonprofit publishers that have been successful, that haven't perished themselves?
Because of the business model and how it looks, now we accept it to such an extent as researchers, as scientists, that we aim towards these big companies like Springer Nature. So I cannot give you an example of a particular journal that have been working in a non-profit way and been able to succeed the same way that Springer Nature, Elsevier, and these other publishers do. However, the preprint journals like bioRxiv and medRxiv, these are journals that accept publications from from people like us who are outside of academia as well.
I'm not a lawyer, but all I've learned about the legal system is if you have good lawyers, you can do anything in life. Like, so I assume that publishers have great lawyers and they're not incentivized in any way, especially not financially, to lose this case. So I think that would be huge, but I don't know why no one's talking about it, but I guess the lawsuit could, if they win the lawsuit, the professor at, I forget where they were a professor at, but if they win, then they could take down for-profit publishing. I just I don't I've never seen one person be able to dismantle a entire industry like that. But maybe there are steps we can take. Like maybe if the scientists complained and they wrote a petition or they refused to publish in certain journals or something, like if the scientists themselves don't want to publish, they don't want to be in the system. They could create their own journals. I think there was one journal back in the day where everyone resigned from the editorial board and they started their own journal that was open source, open publishing type of journal. But I think that it will take more than this lawsuit. I think that the scientists themselves will have to actually complain about this. But I, that's I can't imagine, I can't conceptualize what that might look like. But maybe there is a way to change this. I don't know what that would look like, but I think the more we have people working outside of academia, which is the more we're going to actually need science to be more open.
I think that's part of the problem, right? That you have taxpayers paying for the research because large parts of these fundings and grants come from taxpayers in the end, both in the US and here in Europe and other parts of the world. And ultimately, the people benefiting from this money at the very end of the research, you have the publishers and the pharmaceutical industries in many cases as well, where you see that a lot of the development is done in state-funded research, and where actually the distribution of it, the marketing of the medicines and the intellectual properties eventually go to private enterprises, private companies. And that's a big problem. And I think that the lawsuit that we've been discussing today at least is a good first step to highlight the problem. But I see a development here. I see that people like citizen science, science of science, open science, all these type of initiatives are highlighting the problems that exist in science. And I think those are incredibly positive.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting that this professor took it upon himself to sue all of the publishers. But like we often think of professors as apolitical or people that should not have any views because their only thing is to do science. And we're learning that that's not really the case. Scientists are people, they are in society with everyone, they are exploited by corporations just like your everyday worker is. And I think that this isn't unique to science really in a way, because if you look at here in the US, different people are unionizing every day because they feel exploited for their labor. So maybe a lot of graduate students have already organized and unionized and stuff like that. So maybe that's the thing where we're reclaiming our time and energy from, I hate to say it, but corporate interests, because science is an enterprise and a business just like anything. And scientists are always told not to be political, but maybe they sort of have to start thinking about ways that they can start exerting their power and influence more. And I think science communication and political communication and stuff like that will be more important to them as they navigate all of this.
It's what's called a class action lawsuit, which means that there's a group of scientists, of researchers behind this lawsuit. But the one who took the initiative was this Dr. Lucina Udin. She took this lawsuit forward Now they have to show that there's enough support for this lawsuit. But I think there is some type of benefit to gain also for us as science communicator to be able to report on science. And I agree with you. We should not be scared about talking politics. I don't think it should be specific politic parties, but I think at least there is a lot of politics and economic and an economy involved in science.
Yeah, it's really important that we reflect on these as scientists, as people that work with scientists. Everyone should be concerned about the way we do science in our nation, in here in the U.S. and in Europe and in the world, because science it's studying. It's supposed to be like helping us. So if it's not really helping us, that's really problematic.
Yeah, like I said, it was really nice to share a little bit of my opinions with you. Get to hear a little bit about your experience with it and your thoughts around it. And I really appreciate you joining and talking about this. I hope that this can be developed into something positive, where we're trying to improve the scientific process and trust in the end, because we want to. Science should be to fulfill the public interests and help society, help people in the end. I think that these are discussions that we should have, but I'm always curious to hear what other people think, especially you. You always have good insights on this type of topic.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be on your channel. And this time, my artwork did not fall down. So I'm counting that as a win as well.
I have to say, I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't, because we had a good scene after.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. It was funny how it just fell on my head, and then I think I kind of went like, ah, or something. So, but this time I stabilized my easel so it wouldn't
You
fall.
glued it.
But,
You glued it to the stand.
yeah, it's much more stable now. But yeah, I'm really grateful for this conversation as well, and I think that it's some conversation scientists should be having, and I guess are having. And I'm really heartened by this news of a class action lawsuit to help make publishing more equitable for all.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, Sheeva. Always appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.